office furniture out there. So here we are, living to tell the tale with how secure is security. Many of you know Matthew Prince of Cloudflare, who's been called the most interesting man in the world, who does not drink Dos Equis. So, but give me some, let me just start. Now, Cloudflare basically hosts about, what, 5% of all web traffic. I know that Michelle was up here talking about security earlier. We're talking about how secure is security. Let's start with that. How secure is security? Give us some sense of the landscape, and is that the question, is that the right question to ask of Cloudflare?
Well, I think that, you know, there certainly have been a lot of stories about the risk to either big businesses or even small businesses where it doesn't seem like a week goes by that someone isn't getting hacked or attacked in some way. And so it's really easy to sit up here and say, the sky is falling and the world is ending. And frankly, I think part of what I've always hated about security companies is that they've sold around fear, and, you know, if you don't sign up for us, you're going to be in trouble. And so one of the things that I think has been—
You sell around love.
Well, so I mean, to some extent, I think that, you know, what's changing in the industry is when you see companies like ours or other companies that are really growing very quickly, is that we're saying that security should be built in from the default, and that we should start with a premise of making a secure product, and then we should provide benefits around other things. So if you sign up for Cloudflare, we'll make your site significantly faster, we'll cut your Amazon bill, we'll make a lot of things work a lot better than they would. What we think we're doing is we're helping build a better internet. And we're sort of building in all of the things the internet should have had from the beginning, and security is definitely one of them. But while it's easy to be extremely pessimistic, I think I'm actually pretty optimistic that there are tools like us that can get out in front of, you know, extremely large attacks, even from sophisticated nation-state actors, and be able to protect our customers from those attacks.
But it is one of these subjects that induces paranoia, because you start to think about Russian hackers, you start to think about big government, you know, Orwellian. And one of the things that's been interesting, I think, is when you've been in the news, Cloudflare's cast is somewhat of a renegade, right? Like, oh my God, Anonymous is saying there's ISIS, they're hosting Give us some context in terms of, should you be having barriers to entry? You're signing up 5,000 customers a day. Can it basically come one, come all? You're neutral toward who uses the service?
You know, I think that what we believe in very strongly is in a due process of law, and law means
you went to law school.
Yeah, but legal regimes and lawmakers and otherwise. And I actually get pretty uncomfortable when platforms are starting to make content decisions on what content is good versus bad. You know, Amazon the other day banned selling through their platform books that were written about people having sex, fantasizing about having sex with dinosaurs. I think that's weird. It's not really a fantasy that I have. But I also think it's really weird that, you know, Jeff Bezos should be determining what is moral and amoral, and then that should be it. What we think of ourselves at Cloudflare is as being, we're the plumbers, and we build the pipes, and we comply with all of the laws that we're subject to. But I don't think that my morality should be determining what is and is not allowed online. And if you sort of play the film reel forward, what you'll see is it's going to be really difficult to survive online unless you have a network like Google's or Facebook's, or you're a customer of Cloudflare's is able to take what we've done in democratizing the resources that previously only Google or Facebook had and bringing that to the rest of the web. And so I think it's pretty dangerous if, you know, things that I think are good or bad, we're either favoring or disfavoring. And so from the beginning, you know, we have taken that view that we are the Switzerland of the internet.
And how do you think about, just in general then, security? I mean, you just opened an office, for example, in Washington, not a place that most entrepreneurs like to hang out, in the 202 area code. So give us some sense of, what are you hearing from the policymakers? I mean, are we in that sort of I'm from the government and I'm here to help scary situation, or what do you think that perhaps the tech community should be doing or telling us?
You know, I think that the technology industry in general has done a disservice to themselves by not engaging with policymakers and lawmakers. And I think the lawmakers and policymakers have been a disservice to themselves by not engaging with the technology industry.
Well, Google and Facebook are in Washington. Is that more just lobbying?
A little bit. And well, I mean, at some level, I mean, lobbying is this ugly word, but what lobbying means is go talk to policymakers. And so we should all be lobbying at some level. We should all be representing what our interests are. But yeah, Google's there, Microsoft's there, AT&T is there, and so when you go and you talk to someone, a staffer on Capitol Hill, and you say, do you ever hear from the technology industry? They're like, oh yeah, Google's here all the time, but Google doesn't necessarily represent my interests. They don't represent the interests of all the startups that are here, and so we thought, even though we're still a relatively small organization, we thought it was incredibly important that we engage with policymakers early on, and there's some big fights which are coming. One of the things that we've tried to really lead the way on is cryptography across the web. So last September, we provided to all of our customers, even the customers that don't pay us anything, SSL encryption, which is at the absolute cutting edge, state of the art, as good as Google has across their network, to every single one of our customers, and we did it for free. And in that one day, we doubled the size of the encrypted web. And I think that's, again, I see the fact that the web wasn't encrypted from the beginning as a bug, and we basically just helped patch that bug. And what worries me, though, is that we're heading into this debate in Washington, which we all went through back in the mid-90s, in the crypto wars, about whether cryptography is good or bad. And I'm really worried that the technology industry right now isn't taking seriously that threat, and we feel pretty heady from wins over PIPA and SOPA and all these other debates.
So it's not okay to be agnostic and say you're Apple and say, well, we have no idea what's on Diane's iPhone. Sorry, thanks very much, Department of Justice. Is it that essentially Apple should have more responsibility? What's the right role of the tech company in this whole nexus around security and giving information to governments, for example, to protect us?
Well, what was really interesting was, starting about 2 years ago with the Snowden disclosures, I think the technology industry was sort of agnostic to working with law enforcement. Like they'd do it if the lawyer said they had to, but they didn't want to. And then, the Archduke Ferdinand moment in the latest crypto wars, it was that publication of that PowerPoint document that detailed Google's network, and it had a little smiley face on it that said, encryption added and removed here. And it was basically a description of how the National Security Agency was spying on Google's network. And if I were Google, I would have felt like that was a declaration of war against me by my own government. And what I think you've seen the technology industry do is systematically review all their processes and procedures, and in the process actually tighten a lot of things up. So for example, it seems like we have a new threat to the SSL ecosystem, whether it's Heartbleed or Shell Shock or whatever it is, that's coming out one after another, and that seems like terrible news. What that really is it's a bunch of engineers for the first time in a long time going through line by line by line by line by line of code, really tightening the systems up. And what that means is that if you are a law enforcement agency or if you are a surveillance agency, your job is getting harder and harder with each day. And what worries me is that the sort of knee-jerk response of governments is, let's pass laws that intentionally weaken cryptography, that intentionally weaken the ability for messages to pass along the network. And we're seeing those laws being proposed in the UK right now, in France, there are discussions in the United States. And I think that if the technology industry doesn't engage with lawmakers and talk to them about why those laws are actually dangerous and probably make us all less secure in the end, that we have the risk of ending up on the other side of a set of regulations that is going to be very harmful for a safe and secure internet.
So help us see around corners. We're sitting here this time next year. Given the course that you've seen, you've been behind closed door meetings with President Obama and others. What do you see coming that should give us pause, and what's the fallout effect?
Well, the argument from law, and again, we shouldn't just poo-poo the argument from the beginning. We have to acknowledge it and then give a counter argument. And I think that technology leaders like Tim Cook at Apple have been very outspoken and eloquent in elucidating it. But the argument is, if there's somebody who is molesting a child and we arrest them and we get their phone, and we know that they've been, or we suspect that they've been taking videos on their phone, should Apple have an obligation to be able to open that phone up? And from the law enforcement's perspective, the answer has been yes up until very, very recently, and then something changed where Apple locked that down in a significant way. That is, from a law enforcement perspective, a real risk to them being able to stop bad guys. And I think we should have a public debate over, what are the consequences of that? Why should we do that? What does that mean if you're a dissident in China? What does that mean if you're a freedom fighter in Chechnya? I mean,
right.
We should have that debate about what are the costs and benefits. What I'm worried about, and what I see is that the debate is becoming, is cryptography good or is cryptography bad? And so I think as a technology industry, we've really got to break the debate down into discrete parts. So should Apple, a device manufacturer, when somebody has handed the device or has obtained the device and the law enforcement has physical access to the device, should there be some way for them to get access to it? That's a debate we should have. There's a separate debate about should you be able to secure data as it actually flows across the network? Should we have to provide keys in order to unlock that for starting with the US government, but then inevitably the Chinese government and the Russian government and the UK government and the Yemeni government at some point? And then there's a third debate which we should have about if you're Dropbox or Google or somebody who's storing data in the cloud and someone is serving you with a subpoena, should you have to be storing that data in such a way that you can turn that over? Those are three distinct debates, and what I worry about is because lawmakers aren't being educated about how those are different debates, they're clumping that into one, and that is definitely not in the technology industry's
I want to ask about you personally, because I think it's always interesting when you have the opportunity, and I want to ask also sort of who should be nervous about the type of growth we're seeing at Cloudflare, but from your own personal usage, how do you secure your own security? Give me some sense of just, do you do things by email? Do you store a lot in the cloud? What's the typical sort of toolbox right now for Matthew Prince?
When we first started Cloudflare back in, I remember the first venture capitalists we sat down with, actually the only person we pitched to do our first round of funding was a guy named Ray Rothrock at Venrock. And Ray has invested in probably more security companies than anyone else over the years. And his very first question, 15 minutes into the meeting, was, what are you going to do when you get the death threats? And I remember saying, death threats? But we have become...
So what do you do now that you're getting death threats?
Well, the only thing that Justin Timberlake and I have in common is we've both been swatted. And if you don't know what swatting is, it's when someone calls spoofing your cell phone number at 4 in the morning, and they say, there's a bomb in my house and a guy with a gun, click. And the SWAT team shows up at your house. And it's sort of the much more risky version of having a whole bunch of pizzas delivered to someone's house. But we are very good at thwarting attackers, some of whom are nation states, some of whom are 15-year-old kids with a bone to pick about who knows what. And as a result, I think that has meant that we have become targets ourselves. And so
how have you changed your habits? How do you make sure the SWAT team doesn't come to your house again at 4 in the morning when I get your number or whatever?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a lot of things personally that I've done to sort of make it more difficult to figure out where I live. But in terms of at Cloudflare, we're unique. We use Google Apps for it, and there's a warning that not many people see at Google Apps, which is a red bar that goes across the top of your screen, and about half of our employees have it on their computers that say, you appear to have been a target of state-sponsored malware. And that's a pretty scary thing the first time you see it.
Unless it's Canada, and then you're like, I'm good with that.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, actually, surprisingly, the Canadians have a very sophisticated cyber surveillance department. So
long winters.
They do have. In the UK are the really scary ones. But I think that one of the things that no one tells you when you're starting a company, especially when you're starting a company that has a lot of impact, is that there's a point early on where you're screaming from the rafters and trying to get everyone to pay attention to you, and you do things kind of fast and loose just to get them done, and documents are all over the place. And then there's a point at which all of a sudden you start to really make an impact on the world. And people do bad things to you, or try to. And I'm not sure exactly where we cross that point, but it's something that I think that great investors and great sort of mentors to startups can help startups think about a little bit earlier. And Cloudflare can be one part of that solution, but trying to lock down both how your company is securing itself, how it's securing its users' information, but then even individually how you are thinking about what you're doing in the world, how you're presenting yourself, and it's and again, there's not a bright line when you cross that, but it definitely starts to change your behavior.
So who should be nervous? You say you're getting 5,000 new customers a day. Who's going down? I mean, is it the the Cisco's, the Juno? I mean, we've seen this band of behemoths that have been very successful. We have new behemoths that are rising up. What do you see sort of in this time of disruption? Do you think that, what's Cloudflare look like, and who do you see really sort of, feeling the cost of your existence right now?
Sure. So I think that there is, and you can see this across a whole bunch of industries, there's a macroeconomic trend where we're shifting from hardware, on-premise hardware, software, CapEx, capital expenditures. You spend money and you get a box, right? You get something that's physical and it's yours, and then you can resell it or do whatever you want with it, but it's something physical. To a world of services, cloud, whatever that means, which again means different things at different layers, and then OpEx, so rent. You spend money and then you get to use something for a limited period of time. And we know how that's affecting different companies that are out there. So HP, Dell, EMC, IBM, Sun, everyone who's essentially had a bad last series of quarters, these are guys that were making store and compute devices, places that you would store your data and then run computation against it, and they're quickly being disrupted by the Amazon Web Services and DigitalOceans and Microsoft Azure and Google App Engines of the world, and I mean we all watch how that's happening. A layer up from that, companies like Microsoft, SAP, Oracle that used to just dominate the application space are being disrupted by thousands and thousands of SaaS companies. I mean, there are 100 successful startups targeting different verticals in just the CRM space.
What are some of your favorites? What excites you? I know that our time's gone, but give me some sense of sort of what you see on the horizon that you think is exciting and underappreciated. We kind of have a sense of the overhype, perhaps.
Well, I think that not to toot our own horn, but
besides
I think that
Cloudflare. No.
well, I think that the place that people haven't focused on this enough is in the sort of devices that were sitting at the edge of your network. So Cisco, Juniper, F5, the Firewall of the Month Club. Like the fact that we have firewalls that are firewalls for other firewalls is insane, and we're just buying boxes like this. If you're a large bank today, you're spending $500 million in some cases on just firewalls every single year. And that's an enormous market for these boxes that just can't cope with the threats of the future.
So let me put myself in different chairs I'm in the chair, you can wave a wand, Congress can do anything you want. What should they do? Nothing? What's the right policy in light of the environment we're in?
Well, I think that, I'm a big believer in markets, and I think that the first thing that Congress should do is learn and spend a lot of time understanding the technology industry, and that's to some extent incumbent on them, but that's to some extent incumbent on the technology industry.
Then they say, okay, Matthew, tell us what to do. What should we do?
Well, yeah. So, for example, I think that one of the risks in government in general is the thought that you can control things from the top down. Whereas what's been best about the internet is that it's a network that was really always governed from the bottom up. And so, I think that doing things that encourage innovation, doing things that encourage not checkbox security, but real security, but mostly encouraging markets for these, and rewarding the people who do it right, and making it clear when there are companies out there that do it wrong, that's going to be a lot more successful over the long term than trying to come in and write some law. Law moves very, very slowly. Technology moves very, very quickly. And so the best thing that law can do is encourage best practice and encourage markets.
And I'm the CEO of JP Morgan. I'm or Target. What should I do?
Sign up for Cloudflare.
Sign up for Cloudflare. Yeah. Any other parting thoughts you have for people in terms of advice, opportunities? that you see, since there is a certain paranoia right now about security? What do you think is sort of the answer, rather than, you know, talking about all the different threats? How do you move forward, and maybe are there perhaps some opportunities for new services?
I mean, honestly, the thing that would do more to secure most companies today than anything else is having a serious education program for every single employee that comes in that says one thing and one thing only, which is don't click on attachments in email. If you look back at almost all of the big breaches that we've had, it's not the big complicated things, it's often the really, really simple ones.
It's the e-card from your mother.
It's, yeah, I mean, just don't do that, and that would have probably helped significantly protect Sony. It would have helped with a number of these other threats. I mean, I'd start with the simple stuff, and you know, the rest of it is that if we can get that right, then that's going to be a lot better for us going forward.
Well, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Matthew Prince.
Thank you.
Great.